Okay, thank you. Hi, everybody, esteemed colleagues, friends. Let's make sure this works great. Not yet. Little tease. Just to also acknowledge Signant. I know many vendors. I don't know any vendors that are having this type of future-oriented dialogue, conversation, meeting about eCOA and the future of technology. So genuinely, round of applause for Signant, please. Definitely. And then those who review my pans should be positive next time. I joke. It's okay. Show of hands. How many have actually worked at a site seeing subjects in the last 4 years? Show of hands. I'm proud of you. Brother. Okay, so that's great. That's actually what we expected. Great, Barb, thank you. That's actually what we expected. And so this presentation is targeting you directly. It's targeting the vendors, it's targeting the developers, the sponsors, the CROs, who are sold the eCOA tablet, who then give it to the site. It's for the developers on best practices when you're developing a tablet or an eCOA program. And for the sponsor and the CRO to know the realities of what the site staff and what the subject actually go through. And so that's what we'll be talking about. The role in our daily lives of dealing with technology, particularly eCOA. Can everybody hear me? Am I talking too loud? Oh, thank you. There are definitely advantages over paper to using eCOA, so we'll briefly discuss those. And sort of helpful factors, best practices for, again, the developers, the CROs, the sponsors, the vendors, for tablets, for the subjects on their perspective, using the wearables, the ICF, the PROs, the patient-reported outcomes on the tablets, or the apps. This presentation is not meant to target a specific vendor. See me afterwards, and I'll tell you who the good and the bad are. But certainly there are pros and cons to every vendor. Again, I'll share them to you privately. The CIA is not here, so it's all good. The bottom line also is everything is aligned. Everything is systemic. Everything affects everything. When one thing goes wrong with a tablet, it affects everything. Literally, it affects recruitment, it affects subjects, it affects quality data. And during the presentation, I'll weave all of that in. And then recommendations. So these are all the various roles at a site. There is something missing that I thought of last night when I was showering. Recruitment. We did not include recruitment, which is pivotal. Diane, don't tell HRI that I forgot recruitment. I'm going to get fired. But these are also the pivotal. And of course, the coordinators, arguably, when you're at a site, they coordinate. They run the show. So I had to put them in the middle. The highlighted in red is everything that either currently or aspirationally is technology driven. So for example, participants, the PROs. It is so helpful to have a good eCOA app or tablet for the subject or the participant. I use subject and participant interchangeably. I should be using participant. Again, don't fire me. So for example, there are many PRO scales that the rater misses in terms of if-thens. And then it's the CRA, fortunately, who then catches it, but a month later, too late. A good eCOA, a good PRO, will catch that, and it usually does, and say, no, you can't do that, you didn't answer this first, now go back to here. Great, that's exactly how technology should be. It should be helpful in that way. Raters, for example. There are many tablets that say, for example, on the pans, you rated this, but you rated this item maybe too low. Consider re-rating that item. Very helpful. Another helpful, one of the tablets actually does a pop-up that gives us the convention for that item. I have the conventions memorized, just so you know. But many raters don't. And so those pop-ups are helpful. I actually don't have them memorized all. Just being a little narcissistic. But all these different, this is what the red marks are in terms of how the technology can help all of us. When one thing goes wrong, by the way, again, it's a systemic flow down. It then interferes with patient flow, with recruitment, with data quality. For example, when there's a problem with a tablet and it's not working, I can't see that subject, and I really can't move on for another participant because I don't know, I'm trying to work to get that resolved. So that's 30 minutes, an hour waiting to get that resolved. Now I've got 10 other people, they're now frustrated. So when I interview them, they're just literally saying to me, I don't care, I have to leave. Just write whatever you want. And that's obviously terrible for your studies. Okay. So ideally, it's a symphony. And often it is, but it's not always the case. And I'll go over learned lessons. So what differentiates eCOA from paper? Collects more accurate data. For example, actigraphy watches. I skipped one? Okay, thank you. So we'll get back to that. So again, through reminders, alerts, with protocol compliance. A lot of times the eCOA will tell you exactly what order per the protocol. And with paper, you can easily miss that. So that's great. You get rater messages about just what I talked about, scale administration and scoring conventions. The papers don't do that. I have to go to the actual PANS or the actual MADRS to do that. That's very helpful. We talked about the PRO for the branching and logic sequences. Protocol order. Often the tablets, again, will give you that order so you don't mess up. Missing information, I can't move on to the next question until something is completed or to the next scale. So it'll say, you've missed this. With paper, that often does happen where you're going to miss. Typing. For the Alcoa, the L, I'm notorious, as those have reviewed I'm terrible. My handwriting is terrible. I'm from Israel. That's my excuse. But typing is often very helpful. And then you don't have to deal with legible issues. With many of the CNS scales, and even the non-CNS, we ask about sleep, for example. And we're going with participant self-report. Often not that accurate, especially when it comes to sleep. There's the MADRS sleep item where you have to add up how many hours they slept and didn't sleep compared to their euthymic period. It's very complicated versus the actigraphy can actually tell you how many hours of sound sleep they got. Far more quality data than perhaps I might do interviewing a participant. We talked about the if-thens for the PROs. So speeds data entry for site. Site no longer has to transcribe participant diaries. So we often have paper diaries that they have to then go into a portal. But if the app does that, that takes away that role. That's great. It saves a lot of time for the CRAs, the coordinators and their research associates. Sponsor and CRA can analyze data. For example, they can look at the rater calibrations to see if we're doing it. They can listen to the audio. They can see if what we're doing is accurate per the conventions of the scale. We've had sponsors say, you know what, your BMI for this study, even though it goes up to 40, you're really going more in that 39, 40. Can you start recruiting more in the 30, 29 range? And obviously, we can't guarantee that we would do that, but now that they've mined that data, we absolutely tried to do that. eCOA means regulatory compliance, for example, eCOA C. Okay, so let's get into the tablets. So we're going to do tablets and then more for the patient participant facing documents or technology. So for tablets, it should be user-friendly and intuitive. Ensure high probability of not shutting down and freezing. This happens a lot. I would say 50% of the week, 50% of the time during the week is because the tablet just crashes and we don't know why. Then we have to call IT. We've learned, of course, you can just reboot it. That doesn't always work. I still get alerts saying shut down, and then I shut it down, and it's still saying shut down. So it has to be user-friendly, and we'll get to the IT soon. Stylus pen. It should really write well. There's some stylus pens that write really thick, where I have to like do this to get the pronouncing of the word, versus those that write thin, I can write like normal hand cursive. So ideally, somebody is testing this before it goes out to the site. Typing and research rapport. So while I like typing because my handwriting is terrible, there is, and I talk to raters all the time and site staff, when you're typing on the scale that you're administering to the subject, it can interfere with research rapport. I don't know any research, empirical evidence of that, but anecdotally, again, when I talk to other raters, typing the answers can be restricted for research rapport. There's just something natural with writing. And so I do prefer the stylus pen that then gets sent to the trading vendor or the sponsor to see what we wrote. When not user-friendly, impacts participant reporting of data. We talked about that. It's very frustrating for the subject. They lose their patience. And they often say, I just write down whatever. I've been here for 30 minutes. I've been waiting for you, or we've been dealing with this. And I have to then help get them to have patience and assure them that we're moving on, but we need them to certainly provide quality data. I don't know what can be done. If you developers could please help us. All of the site staff have books upon books of our passwords, and the passwords have to be changed every 3 months. And it's so difficult to then have to redo it every 3 months. Every app, every tablet has their own sign-on, and their username is different. So I literally have to go look at my book, because it could be eCohen, Elan.Cohen, my email, all these different usernames. So I always have to go look. Some vendors have great recording, easy to do. It's part of the tablet, so I just turn on the recorder. It tells me when I'm recording. Some of the tablets even tell me how long I've been recording. So if I'm doing a Madras and I'm at 35 minutes, I'd be like, why am I at 35 minutes? It helps me clinically understand what's happening with the participant. But some you have to hook up to the tablet. You don't know if it's recording. You find out a month later from the vendor to say, you didn't record. I'm like, well, I thought I recorded. I didn't purposely not record. So again, make it user-friendly in that aspect. Easy to address queries. There's one vendor, I'll tell you later, who the query for the staff is not in the tablet. You have to go to a portal, but you don't know that you have that query. They don't send you an email until the CRA says, you have 30 queries and it's 30 minutes out, 30 days outstanding, and that email goes to the PI and the sponsor, and it makes us look like we don't know what we're doing. But I'm like, well, nobody told me. So they said, well, no, you have to go check the portal every day. I don't have time. I'm a little aggravated. Dan, give me some liquor. So I don't have time to check your portal every day. I've got many sponsors, many vendors. So again, think of it from our perspective. What is it like? I'll go into recommendations, but I'll mention it now. Call the site. What's it like for you to use this particular vendor? What are the pros? What are the cons? I rarely, Ben, where's dear Ben? I rarely get called to ask about what vendors you like. Our group is part of an alliance, of like maybe 5 or 6 sites, and that alliance does yearly surveys. And that survey is shared with the sponsors and CROs and the vendors. So from now on, when they do ask, well, what does your rater prefer? What does your coordinator prefer? What does your lab staff prefer? We have those answers. If you're a sponsor or CRO, and you want those answers from the sites you're working with, ask them, do a survey. Let me know what you guys are thinking, your experience. Tablets are correlated with participant status. Yeah. So I often get some tablets correlate with the EDC. So when a subject withdraws or is a screen fail, there's a cross communication. But sometimes they're not. So I'll get an email from a vendor saying, you missed visit 6. And I'm a type A personality, if you couldn't tell. So I'm like, I missed visit 6. Oh my God, I'm going to get protocol deviation. The IRB is going to come. The FDA is going to... And then it turns out, no, visit 6, they were withdrawn from, at visit 5. And I'm like, oh, well, they didn't know because their tablet didn't communicate with them via the EDC. So if you could make them cross-communicate, so helpful. Okay, tablet and portal synchronization, that's very similar. Tablets. This is sort of spreading the small stuff. I know it may seem small to you, but this is important. We get maybe 30 tablets every 2 weeks for studies, whether they be new tablets or replacement tablets, and they're not labeled. So in the box it says it's for, let's say, Lily, blah, blah, blah study. But they're not labeled. So that means I have to take my time, go look for the label maker, and then go label that tablet. One sponsor has recently, in the past 6 months, labeled the study for that tablet. It is so helpful. The only issue is that label, can you guess, isn't sticking. So you know what I did? I went to Staples and I got super glue. I just super glued it, and now that label's not coming off. A little aggressive. Okay, so if you could label the tablets, that'd be great. Correlate with intended assessment scale. The PANS. There's the people who are developing on the PANS into the tablet may not be really aware of the conventions of the scale. For example, my PANS, shout out for the PANS people. So when you do the PANS and you're talking about agitation, it doesn't ask about irritability, but you have to ask about irritability if they report not being angry in the past week. But there was nowhere for us to write about irritability in this particular tablet. You couldn't write irritable because you put no on something and then they won't let you write next to it. So then, of course, the writer training company calls and says, you didn't ask about irritability. Au contraire, I did ask about irritability, but your tablet didn't let me write that I did. Go listen to the audio, although sometimes it's not audio recorded. Okay, you can tell that rater training companies love when they call me. We've had tablets where the score is added incorrectly. Let's say you need a 60 to get in, and the tablet adds it up to 40. It added up incorrectly. And I'm like, I could have sworn this patient's moderately symptomatic. It has to be at least a 65. So now I got to go count all the other things. Like, I don't have time for that. And it turns out it is indeed a 65. But I can't just say it's a 65. Your tablet says it's a 40. I have to call the IT department, tell them what's happening. Now my other subjects are waiting. This subject now can't go into lab because they're waiting for this response to make sure indeed they can proceed because it's an inclusion criteria. And I don't want to say they can proceed because I don't want to get fired. Blah, blah, blah. So you see how it's systemic, how one thing affects the other. A good solution is to make sure, and we'll go over this in the recommendations, a good solution is to make sure that tablet is tested by the folks who are actually doing the work. Or Margot, I know, for example, has worked at a site. Let her test it. I'm sorry, Margot. Stand up, Margot. Be proud of yourself. Okay. All right. IT department. I love IT people. I really do. But I would say make sure your IT staff are truly trained. So I have these pictures here because it feels like I'm on the tarmac for 3-4 hours. And also, just a little empathy building here. Generally speaking, the people that we're seeing at our sites have severe mental health issues. They don't have the coping mechanisms of how to deal with waiting and calming, self-soothing, self-calming. I pat myself on the back. I'm like, it's okay, it's okay. They don't have those sort of capabilities, generally speaking. So what's it feel like for all of you when you're on the tarmac, waiting, the pilot's not giving you answers about what's happening, what's the problem, and then, of course, how good does it feel when that plane goes up, that you're headed to your location? That's sort of what's like at a site on a daily basis. Really, I'm not exaggerating. Come to visit our site, or any site. So we often, when we're calling IT, the staff say, oh, let me go get someone. So wait a minute, I just waited 15 minutes. You don't know the answer. You're going to go get somebody. This is a true story. So they didn't know. They had to go get somebody. They came back and said, well, the IT department is in a meeting. They'll call you back. I said, I am with the subject right now. We're waiting for this to be resolved. I can't wait. Tell the IT department to stop meeting or one person walk out of the meeting. It was not good. 3-minute wait time, fair. We often wait 30 minutes, 40 minutes. We had a PI who presented at a conference at ISCTM who averaged how long her staff waited during a 6-month period. It's not good. Reduce staff time frustration. Yeah, we talked about all that. So just make sure the IT staff. Why don't you, I always thought of this, call your IT department spontaneously. Just call and say, hey, I have a problem. See what they say. See if they can know how to answer the question. I always wish the CEO of Sprint, would do that. Same thing with your companies. Okay, let's get into the patient-facing. Again, user-friendly and intuitive. So we wrote this La La Land. I worked at a CRO, and I went to a vendor for an eCOA, and the meeting went swimmingly. It was like, we got to use this tablet. This is the best tablet ever. 4 years move ahead. I'm using the same tablet. Not good. They sold that company a bill of goods. So it's La La Land versus real world. Often you have to know who's using these equipment. It's people who they tend not to know about the technology. So it does take our staff hours to train the participant, and don't also forget after the visit, the subject then calls us. What did you want me to do? I was confused about this. I know I wrote it down, but I was a little still confused. That happens all the time. That, by the way, is not in our budget. Oftentimes, I hope you all are also aware that through US, the research sites are dwindling significantly. You're having less and less research sites in the US conducting clinical trials, largely because they can't keep up with the technology consequences. Not the technology, but the consequences. It literally takes hours for our coordinators to work with these technology with the participant. The participant calls saying, I did save the data. It's saying I didn't save the data. Now the coordinator has to call the IT department. So again, test it out. Make sure it's user-friendly. Okay. Pre-test on actual patients. Right, so if it's Alzheimer's, or if it's anxiety, if it's PTSD, test out that equipment with that indication, a patient with those indications. What's it like for them? What needs to change? That often does not happen. Or alternatively, you can give it to the site. We are happy to test for it because we know what that subject will go through. By the way, back to that budget thing, we have started to put in the budget when we know, as often we don't know, what the technology is going to be. We put in the budget our time, our extra time having to use that technology. That was actually recommended very nicely from a CRO, and we have done that, and nobody's barked back. So thank you. Resetting device. We had one tablet a program where to reset it, for some reason our building, the internet wasn't working with that app, but all the other apps and all the other tablets, it worked fine. They had to go into the parking lot under a certain tree, and then it would reset. So you could just see him going like this. Okay, we're here. We can get back. Ease of transferring data. Sometimes it's very difficult. It freezes. Then you have to start all over again. The reconnection. Again, we talked about this with the parents, especially for ADHD or the informant for Alzheimer's, or even the informant for schizophrenia. These are very difficult to find individuals. They're pearls in our industry to get that informant. And so when they get frustrated and they give up and they don't want to participate anymore in the study, that is a huge loss to the clinical trial, huge. So we've had parents say, look, I've saved the data, it's not saving, I'm done. And then, well, can you come in? Well, do I get paid for my time? Because I work. By the way, that's another issue with compensation. They will get compensated, the informant, for coming in, but they're not getting compensated often, about 90% of the time. Some studies do compensate for their work of doing what they need to fill out at home, but oftentimes they don't. So they're not getting compensated for their calling the IT department, calling us when there are problems. That also needs to be put into the ICF. Reciprocal deviations. Right. So when the caregiver's not filling out the information, it can come off as a protocol deviation because they should be, but in fact they say they are doing it, it's just not saving accurately. There's great tablets that remind the subject, that remind us to remind the subject. That is so helpful to fill out the certain forms. We are doing a study right now where that's not the case. And in the protocol, it is a deviation if the subject at home does not fill in the PRO scale on the website. And at the IM, there was a big uproar, but that's how it is currently, as is, until they switch it, where they alert us that the subject is not filling it in. Helpful locate the device if it's lost. So paper doesn't only get lost, the device also gets lost. We had a few studies, maybe 2 studies, where the subject reported having itching from the device, the wearable, or a rash, and we asked the CRO, how do you want us to Actually, it came out like, well, they're saying it's an AE, but the sponsor is saying it's not an AE because it has nothing to do with the IP. So while they're all trying to figure it out, we can look sort of bad that we're late documenting a potential AE. So these things have to be worked out ahead of time. Again, it's empathy building, it's a perspective taking. What's it going to be like for the site and for the subject? All right, we're getting there. Considers the lifestyle. App does not deplete cell data. So there's some apps so we don't get the cell phone. We don't get a phone for the app to go to that we give to the participant. They have to put an app. And that's fine, but many of these have data. They don't have enormous data time, so it depletes their data time, and they don't want to have then the app, i.e. participate in the study. So sometimes we need to put the app on their cell phone, but then there's privacy issues. We've had some coordinators see some less than fortunate things on their cell phone. Odor resilient, so we've had subjects say they don't want to wear the actigraphy or some other device because it smells, or the rash. It's uncomfortable, so they have to wear it to sleep. And so among the raters and the staff, we've often thought, so is this actually accurately reflecting their sleep? Because they're saying that the device is uncomfortable and therefore, hindering their sleep. We've had subjects, of course, bipolar mania, who say they want very attractive, this should be nicer, do you have it in gold, do you have it in certain, I'm like, no, it's plastic, I'm sorry. Well, this doesn't look good with my outfit, which I understand. Not conspicuous confidentiality. Right. So some of the devices, I don't know about now, but it might be a year ago, were pretty large. And so their family and friends would say, well, what's that for? And, well, I'm in a study. Oh, you're in a study. What for? It's none of their business. But of course, now that the topic was opened. ICS, we've had some issues with it not downloading. So we were allowed to use paper. Well, you had to get permission to use paper. So that took a few hours because you had to send an email to the person in the CRO to get the permission. Then we found out that once the eICF was on the tablet, we had to engage in that work. So that's double the work now because they wanted everything electronic once the paper was available. Signing off. We've had a tablet where to sign it, you couldn't just sign it electronically. You had to push down, and it wasn't working. It took literally 5 minutes to just put a signature. Again, somebody has to be behind the scenes making sure this actually works. When it works, it's fantastic. I get it. The site wants to do electronic, but it has to work efficiently, sufficiently. We had one tablet with the pre-test, once it was signed, our instructions were when it turned green, you were done. So we moved on. In fact, we missed something, but we were told it was green. Well, it was a malfunction. Well, that's the site's fault, but we didn't know it was a malfunction. But the site is blamed for that, and we don't like that. So recommendations, summing up, systemic approach, take everybody's perspective in mind, ask the site vendor, ask the site, what is your recommendation? What have you used? What have you liked? Why did you not like it? Because then the CRO or the sponsor can go back to that vendor and say, hey, this was a complaint. Did you ever address that? Sometimes they've addressed it. I've talked to vendors and they said, that was a year ago. We fixed it. Thank you for your feedback. Consult. Have real raters, site staff work on that device before it's initiated in the trial. Site budgets, we've talked about this, should reflect the actual work that is being done by the staff. And we've not gotten pushback. So it's a line item. And fortunately, again, we've not gotten pushback. Participant compensation should reflect for their time outside of the site working on that tablet or on that app. It shouldn't just be at the study visit. They are working hard other times to get you the data. So that should be reflected. I don't think an IRB would push back. In fact, we added, for one of the studies recently, we added $20 in addition to the $75 and $20 for them to fill out once a week on an app. IRB did not push back. We have some studies that said your only choice is the technology. We are not giving you paper scales. And I'm confused as to why that is. The technology is at times not where it needs to be, so it's going to fail. I don't want a subject waiting hours, a participant waiting hours until that's fixed. Can I just go right to paper? There are conferences, professional conferences, ISCTM, ASCP, CNS Summit, that have subcommittees on these very topics. And I highly encourage whatever conference there is to have those subcommittees and for us to develop a plan to go back to the vendors, the CROs, the sponsors, to say this is what we recommend. Well, that's it for this presentation. Thank you. Go ahead. I have low self-esteem.